Welcome to Holocaust Museum Houston's virtual programs. Thank you for taking time out and being here this evening. I'm Tamara Savage, Managing Director and Director of Public Programs, and it is my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Moshe Vardi as our guest speaker. Dr. Vardi is going to discuss the Hungarian Holocaust. We will leave time for a brief Q&A at the conclusion of Dr. Vardi's talk. To participate, please submit your questions to the Q&A box, which can be found at the bottom of your screen. We will do our best to get to as many of the questions as possible. This program is being recorded and will be available through our YouTube platform at a later date. We will be sending out this information via email to all registrants within the next day or two. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker. Moshe Vardi is University Professor and the Karen Ostrom George Distinguished Service Professor of Computational Engineering. He currently leads the Technology, Culture, and Society Initiative at Rice University. He chaired the Computer Science Department at Rice University from 1994 until 2002. And led the Ken Kennedy Institute for Information Technology at Rice University from 2001 until 2019. Moshe received his PhD from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in 1981. He is the author and co-author of over 600 articles, as well as 2 books, Reasoning About Knowledge and Finite Model Theory and Its Applications, and the editor of several collections. We might wonder what this has to do with the Holocaust. Well, Moshe is also a second gen. His parents survived the Hungarian Holocaust, and his talk will focus on that period during World War II. Moshe continues this important legacy of telling the stories of survivors so that this vital part of history is not forgotten. And now let's hear from Dr. Vardi.
Thank you, Tamara. Thank you all for joining us tonight to discuss the Hungarian Holocaust. I put my email address at the bottom of the slide, and you are welcome to write it down, and I would welcome later email with questions or comments on this important topic. We just celebrated the 76th anniversary for the liberation of Auschwitz, the largest Nazi concentration and death camps in World War II. 76 years is a very long time. The number of survivors among us are dwindling, and many people would like to write off that sordid chapter of history. So why are we still talking about it? We're still talking about it because somehow one of the most outstanding historical events of the 20th century has become controversial. You know, we are facing ignorance. I mean, this is to me shocking. 2/3 of millennials don't know what Auschwitz is. Denial. Many people still deny the historicity of the Holocaust, and attempt to distort it. You know, the polls are trying to somehow own part of the Holocaust. Yes, there were victims also of Nazi conquest, but they are somehow trying to own the Holocaust as if they are also the major victims there. And just recently, we had one of the most scariest days in the last, I've been in this country almost 40 years, and this is one of the most scariest days, January 6th, Capitol insurrection. And we saw people with T-shirts, "Come Auschwitz," and with a noose. And it's not clear whether the target of the noose are going to be African Americans or Jews. One of us is the intended target of this. So we must continue to talk about the Holocaust. But as you heard, I'm not a historian, I'm a nerd. So why am I talking about the Holocaust here? So let's go back a fair number of years. What you see here is me 12 years ago. And when I'm 12, not 12 years ago, many years ago, when I'm 12 years old. Some people say that I barely changed. But at that age, I realized that the most significant event of my life occurred before I was born. Very often, psychologists talk about formative emotional event that shapes people's life. And the event that shaped my life was the Holocaust. It happened before I was born. I don't know when I learned about the Holocaust. I have no memory of learning about the Holocaust. But I grew up in a home where my father have lost grandfather, father, stepmother, 6 sisters, and 1 brother. My mother lost grandmother, mother, father, 1 brother, 3 sisters. My mother had a number tattoo on her arm. This is not her arm. I could never bring myself to take a photograph of her arm. I wanted it, but I could never bring myself to do it. So you can see that I grew up in a house where there are more ghosts than people who are alive. So the Holocaust was in the air all the time. So at age 12, I read my first nonfiction book. What was my first nonfiction book? 1,200 pages of the rise and fall of the Third Reich. The book came out in 1960, was translated the next year to Hebrew. And a few years later, I decided that I need to read it. And I read 1,200 pages, the rise and fall of the Third Reich. So the Holocaust was very much a part of my shaping who I am and how I grew up. And that's why I need to talk about the Holocaust. Now, my mother was a real storyteller. After she retired at age 60, she spent the next 20 years telling Holocaust stories. She was such a good storyteller that she would appear on television to talk about the Holocaust. She would go to school to talk about the Holocaust. That became her main job for 20 years. Until at age 80, she was just too frail to continue. She passed away about 1.5 years ago, on May 17, 2019. Precisely 75 years after her deportation to Auschwitz. I mean, I found this coincidence just amazing. And she passed away on Friday afternoon. I arrived in Israel 2 hours after she died. The funeral, fortunately, was on Sunday. I spent the Saturday sitting down and writing down her obituary. And I made a resolution then that it is now my duty and my mission to carry the torch of talking about the Holocaust. That's why I'm telling you this story. Now, why the Hungarian Holocaust? What is very special about the Hungarian Holocaust? In terms of sheer numbers, the biggest number of the Holocaust, it's Poland and the Soviet Union. In terms of number, you can see the Hungarian Holocaust is about 10% of the whole Holocaust, less than 10% of the whole Holocaust. But it is the closing chapter of the Holocaust. It takes place very, very late. It takes place in the second half, practically, of 1944. But at that point, the Nazi industrial killing machines is so efficient, so sophisticated, they were able to do it in a few months, in about half a year, they were able to kill close to 600,000 Jews. It is just, the efficiency is astounding. So let's try to situate it in the context of World War II. In June 4, Rome is captured by the Allies. In June 6, the Normandy landings. Now, here in the United States, we paid, of course, the biggest attention to the Western Front in World War II. But the bigger front, the bigger fights, the bigger battles were on the Eastern fronts, where there were colossal battles. In Operation Bagration, June to August 1944, German Army Group Center has been destroyed by the Red Army. And then after that, July to August 1944, it's called the Lvov-Sandomir Offensive. The German Army Group South is destroyed. And really at that point, there's nothing to stop. No serious German fought to stop the Soviet Union from going all the way to Berlin, which they have arrived in early 1945. In fact, by July 20 of 1944, the Wehrmacht, the generals of the Wehrmacht know that the war is over. and there is a general conspiracy. Von Stauffenberg and other conspirators try and fail to assassinate Adolf Hitler in his Wolfsburg field headquarters because they knew that the war was over. So by June of 1944, already even the Wehrmacht knows the war is over. Now, few people will be able to point on a map where Hungary is. So I'm showing you where Hungary is. You can see, you can recognize the Italian boot. You can see that Hungary is a bit to the east of the Hungarian boot. And beyond that, today, this is going to be, at the time, this was the republics of the Soviet Union leading there. So it is very much in the center of Europe, or the east side of Central Europe. Now, I need to give you a little context about the history of Hungary. So, of course, Hungary was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And that monarchy collapsed in World War I. But strangely enough, Hungary stayed a monarchy, except there was no king, but there was a regent. And the regent was Admiral Miklos Horthy. And the strange thing is, so you have a country with no king, but it's a monarchy, and the regent is an admiral for a country that has no coast. Nevertheless, it was the reality. Now, Hungary lost so much territory. This has been described by historians as a national wound that still festers to this very day, how much territory Hungary lost. In fact, my mother told me that when she was going to elementary school, every day they were making a pledge not to forget Greater Hungary. In November of 1940, Hungary joined the Axis. The Axis was at the time Germany, Italy, and Japan. Hungary joined the Axis, and the bounty was they get a lot of the territories back. And we will see the fact that they got some territories back is very important part of this story. In July 1941, Hungary enters the war. Just to remind you that in June 20th, as I recall, Germany invades the Soviet Union. So shortly after that, and in fact, the beginning, the Germans advanced very fast. And Hungary decided to join the war. But by about a year later, by the middle of 1942, the Germans get stuck in Stalingrad, the Battle of Stalingrad, and the Hungarian lost a whole army. The Hungarian Second Army was wiped out. And then it became clear to the Hungarian that maybe joining the Axis was not so smart after all. Now let's talk about the Jews in Hungary. So the Jews in Hungary received civil rights, was called emancipation, in the middle of the 19th century. Before that, they were severely limited in what they can do, what profession they can have. They couldn't own land, all kinds of things they could not do. But emancipation let out the huge talent, hidden talent of the Jews. By 1920, the Jews, who are only 5% of the Hungarian population, are 60% of the doctors, 50% of the lawyers, 40% of engineers and chemists, 35% of editors and journalists, 30% of musicians. And in fact, their role in society was so prominent that Admiral Horthy, the regent, has written, "I've considered it intolerable that here in Hungary, everything, every factory, bank, large fortune, business, theater, press, commerce, etc., should be in Jewish hands. And that the Jew should be the image reflect of Hungary, especially abroad." So you could imagine that resulted in a high level of anti-Semitism in Hungary, which was the case. I'll come back to it in a minute. I would say the gallery of outstanding personalities, Jews in Hungary, is outstanding. Physicists, and many of you may be familiar to you, Leo Szilard, Edward Teller, who played a role in the United States, Eugene Wigner, also in the United States, a whole bunch of mathematicians, and so on and so forth. I only put people that I kind of know about, but this was true in music and in literature, and even in athletics. They were great Jewish Hungarian soccer players. Now, many of them have converted to Christianity. Why is that? Well, let's see a bit, what about anti-Semitism? So going back to 1920, shortly after Hungary becomes an independent monarchy, they pass a law, numerous clauses, meaning there is a quota on how many Jews can attend universities. Then, as they were inspired by Germany later in the 30s, and they start passing more laws. But even the academic numerous clauses explain why many scientists converted to Christianity, because that was the escape. You could, if you converted, you're not Jewish anymore, and you could attend university. In 1938, the first Jewish law restricted the number of Jews in commercial enterprises. 1939, the second Jewish law. Now the Jews are defined racially. Before that, they were defined by religion. If you converted, you're not Jewish. Now they're defined racially. And by 1941, they even prohibited intermarriage and sexual relation between Jews and non-Jews. And also in 41, they instituted labor. Once they joined the Axis, they instituted labor services. And many tens of thousands of Jews were, this is forced labor. And 50,000 Jewish laborers perished. And I'll come back later how it's related to my family. Now, there is a bit of a paradox here. There is a difference between our Jews and foreign Jews. So, because Poland was attacked in 1939, there were many Jewish refugees in Hungary. So in 41, Hungary expels these Jewish refugees. They are sent back to Poland, and when they were expelled to the Soviet part of Poland, Poland was split in two, German part and Soviet part. They were expelled to the Soviet part, and when Germany attacked the Soviet Union, there was massacre of 10,000 of Jews in Operation Barbarossa. So this was the foreign Jews, so to speak. What about the Hungarian Jews? They were Hungarian citizens. Horthy resisted German pressure and refused to allow deportation of Hungarian Jews to German death camps. So there was a difference between how Hungary treated its own Jews. For example, in contrast, Slovakia did deport Jews to concentration camps, but Hungary did not. And we will see the same issue will be between Hungary and Romania, for example. How do they handle Jews that are citizens? So here you see Horthy said, these are our Jews, we're not going to deport them. Now, in mid 44, it's become clear and clear that Germany will lose the war. So Hungary is trying to get out of this and trying to negotiate a separate peace with the Allies. The Germans realized that something is afoot. And in the middle of March 44, Hitler summons Horthy to a castle in Austria. And while he's doing that, he's ordering German troops to capture critical Hungarian facilities. Horthy has no choice. He was forced to appoint a pro-Nazi government in Hungary. And Hungary is now under soft German occupation. We'll see what soft means. Under soft German occupation. It's still nominally independent, but German troops are capture critical facilities. And Adolf Eichmann is sent to Hungary in early April of 1944. And he insists that the Jews, now you cannot resist giving us the Jews. On April 14 of 1944, the decision was made to deport Hungarian Jews to Auschwitz. And an incredibly efficient operation started. In just 2 months, between mid-May and mid-July of 1944, over 400,000 Hungarian Jews from the countryside deported. Why the countryside? Well, the Jews, there was a huge gap between many of the more educated Jews and the Jews that had a more international connection lived in Budapest. So the decision was, let's first of all deal with the countryside, with rural Hungary. Rural means not villages, but towns and not Budapest was a large city. And the operation logistically was performed by the Hungarians. The policemen that forced people to leave their home and get on the train were Hungarian policemen. And they were taken to Auschwitz, where 75% of the people were immediately basically sent to the gas chambers. 25% were sent to the labor part. You need to distinguish between Auschwitz, which is a labor camp, and Birkenau was the death camp. Now let's get to my family. This is my mother, Ziporah Mandel. I think the pictures from 1943, where she is about 15 years old. This is a guesstimate. She was born and grew up in a town with a long name, WWII. I mean, everybody has called it Uihei. It's in northeast Hungary. After finishing 6 classes of mandatory education, she became an apprentice to a photographer. And these are pictures were taken by the photographer, and the negatives, she found the negative after she went back to the town after the war. That's why we have pictures from before the war. We don't have many pictures from before the war. These are among the few pictures that we have because she worked in the studio, in a photographic studio. So there is a video of my mother. She's in her mid-60s, telling the story of the deportation to Auschwitz. It's a very moving video. We're a bit short of time, so I don't have time to play it here. But when you send you the email after the talk with the link to the recording of the talk, I will also include this link so you can see my mother telling a very, very dramatic story of the emotional roller coaster of being on a train to Auschwitz. I put here the picture of the scream of Munch, because part of the story is when she left the city, all the doors and all the windows are closed. Nobody is daring to look at them. Everybody knows what's going on. All the Gentiles know what's going on, and they just lock their house. But one neighbor, she said, had her window open, and she was like this in the window. Silent scream. And my mother went back, after she came back, she went to the city, she went to visit that neighbor. And that neighbor said, God will never forgive us for what we have allowed to happen. She's on this incredibly harrowing trip to Auschwitz because they are in an incredibly crowded cattle cars. And she's there with her family in horrible condition. Some older people, not very healthy people, in fact, died on the train itself. When she arrives at Auschwitz, she's the youngest one. My mother was 5 feet tall. She was a very petite woman. And she's 16 years old when she arrives there. Because this was a cattle car, there was no steps. They had to jump from the train. And prisoners helped them to get off the train. And the story she told was that the prisoner, she was so small, the prisoner just held her in the air and asked her, how old are you? And she said, 16. And he said, say 18, Zug 18. And he puts her down and off she goes. And she is totally perplexed and befuddled. What does it mean, say 18? What does he mean by that? And then she gets to the selection line, and a German officer, very elegant, maybe Mengele, we're not sure, is doing the selection. The selection is who can work, will go to Auschwitz, and who is too old or too young or too sick, and will go to Birkenau, to the gas chambers. Like her parents, grandparents immediately were sent to the gas chambers. The selection officer looks at her, he hesitates, and he asks her, how old are you? And she said, I don't know what made me. I just said 18. And she sent off to the labor camp. And you know, a small event like that was the difference between life and death. She went there with her, she was the youngest one. She went with two older sisters. She's the only one that survived. Her two sisters did not survive. And of course, all the rest of the family that went to the gas chamber, no one survived. My father is a bit older. He was born in 1927. This is a picture of him a bit older. This is a picture after the war, I think. I think this is maybe a passport picture from maybe 47 or 48. He grew up in Oradea, which was part of Romania, northern Transylvania. But I mentioned to you that Hungary gained territory back when they joined the Axis. In particular, they gained northern Transylvania, went back to Hungary in 1941. So he grew up in Romania, but from 1941, it is now Hungary. He was assigned to a rabbinical family, probably 10 generations of rabbi. Unfortunately, I broke the rabbinical chain. He was sent to a seminary at age 13. He was considered a prodigy and was sent to a rabbinical seminary at age 13. Now, in 44, when there are more and more persecution, he's back at home from the yeshiva. And he's just about to become 17, and they're getting the deportation order. My father was a very strong-willed person all his life. And this boy really decides, I do not want to be deported. And I asked him, what made you decide not to be deported? They did not know about Auschwitz. It's very important. They had no idea what Auschwitz is. He said, I did not want to be at the mercy of the Germans. So he came up with a plan that he will hide in the attic. They had an attic with a very low floor. So you could, if you lie on the floor of the attic, even if someone climbs up and sticks their head, they will not see that someone is there. A Gentile neighbor of the friend of the family gave him his son's paper, so he will have documents. And that was the plan. But very close, as they were getting very close to the plan, you know, this is still, you know, he's not yet 17. He became scared. So he goes to his father and asks for his father's approval. Now, his father was not just a rabbi, he was a dayan, he was a Jewish judge. He was a person who does ruling every day. And his father refused to do ruling. His father told the 17-year-old, almost 17-year-old boy, in time like this, no one can give advice. Everyone has to act according to his best judgment. The rest of the family was deported and no one survived. My father was the only one who survived. He hid there for about 2 weeks, and then they knew somehow that there are no deportation in Budapest, so he decided to go to Budapest. And he has false documents and some money, so he makes his way to Budapest. Now, when I talk about the deportation of my mother, the two sons, her two brothers, were not there already because they were drafted to labor services. Now, one of them was called Moshe Mandel. And Moshe Mandel, we don't know what happened to Moshe Mandel. In 1943, the family received notice that he perished. For example, sometimes when the Hungarian did, they took this kind of a labor corps and they had them try to clear up minefields. So we don't know under what circumstances Moshe Mandel perished, but it's what's conceivable that he was sent to Soviet Union, to Stalingrad, for example. We don't know. But Eliezer was still in Hungary. And in May 1944, there is a bit of a confusion. On one hand, Jews are being deported to Auschwitz. But Eliezer is in a labor camp, Hungarian labor camp. What will happen to the Jews in Hungarian labor camp? There is lack of clarity. And even the Hungarians were not sure what's going to happen. Eventually, these Jews already were deported. But Eliezer was saved by Hungarian Schindler. What's the story? It's an amazing story. One day, a fairly high-ranking Hungarian officer arrives at this labor camp, and he tells the commander, I need some people for a job. And so they all are called for there is a roll call, and they all stand up in attention. And the officer says, who here is a shoemaker? And some people, including Eliezer, raise their hand. And the officer chooses 5 people and says, come with me. And he takes them in his car, and they start whispering to each other in Yiddish. Everybody said, I hope you're a shoemaker because I know nothing about shoemaking. And none of them was a shoemaker. They all were worried about the deportation side to get out of it. And the officer takes them to a huge warehouse full with hundreds of thousands of shoes. And their job as shoemaker was to lace the shoes. And they were there for a few weeks lacing shoes. And he brought them water and food. And somehow what happened there, they gained enough time that they never were deported to Auschwitz. For example, Eliezer ended up going to Bergen-Belsen. But Bergen-Belsen was not a death camp. It was a camp. Many people died because of tough condition, but it was not a death camp. And Eliezer survived. His wife and young daughter were sent to Auschwitz and murdered in Auschwitz. Now, I told you that my parents, they did not know what Auschwitz is. Did people know about Auschwitz? So there was something called the Verba-Wetzler report. So Verba and Wetzler were 2 Slovak Jews, and they managed to escape from Auschwitz in early April of 1944. Remember, the deportation decision was April 14. They escaped on April 10. And immediately wrote a report. They told them what's happening in Birkenau. Birkenau was the extermination camp. And the report was provided to Jewish leaders in late April. And they decided not to publicize it. They were afraid of panic. We'll come back to this point. They did not publicize it. In fact, it leaked abroad. And the publicity was finally in mid-June, there was international publicity. It was an uproar. Remember, the war is very close to an end in some sense. People know that Germany will not win the war. It's fairly clear at that point. And there's tremendous pressure on Hungary to stop the deportation. And ordered deportation halt in early July. Still, almost 50,000 Jews were deported after that. But then the deportation stopped in the countryside. The Allies knew about what's happening now at Birkenau, but they chose not to bomb Birkenau, not to bomb the train. They said, no, the best way is just to continue to prosecute the war. While, again, people were still dying in Auschwitz. And I'll come back to the point about the Zionists, the Jewish leader who did not publicize the report. Now, by October 44, it's become even clearer. Even Horthy says it is obvious to any sober-minded person the German Reich has lost the war. And he wants to bail out. So he goes on the radio and announces that Hungary signed an armistice with the Soviets. But remember, there are German troops all over Hungary. So at that point, the Germans decided to do a takeover of Hungary. Horthy and his sons are imprisoned. Now it's a hard occupation. And instead of having a pro-Nazi government in Hungary, you have a Nazi government in Hungary. There is an Arrow Cross Hungarian party. It was a Nazi party. And now they are in charge of Hungary. Horthy is in prison. And now they start the Budapest Holocaust. The Budapest Holocaust starts in the middle of October, incredibly late. And they do ghettos in Budapest and death marches and executions. Now, this is now very close to liberation. By January, February, the Soviet Union is coming and they would liberate Budapest. But in this short time of about 3 months, 100,000 Jews out of 250 Jews in Budapest were killed by now mostly by the Hungarian Nazis, by the Arrow Cross. Now, remember, I told you there was a whole long list of Hungarian scientists, prominent Hungarian personalities. They owe their survival very often to Jewish persecution, because of the persecution, many of them decided to leave Hungary already before the war. Many of them, as they arrived in the United States before the war. Some managed to survive by all kinds of means. Imre Lakatos managed to get, again, like my father, he assumed gentile identity. Alfred Rennie escaped from labor services. The whole people survived by, not all of them, but many of them survived. Many of them made their way to the United States. And they were so brilliant. This was such a brilliant cohort of scientists. They became known as the Martians of Budapest. Isaac Asimov said, there's a rumor in America that there are two intelligent races on Earth, humans and Hungarians. And there were jokes. How do you recognize a Hungarian? He enters a revolving door behind you, but he lives ahead of you because he's so smart. And here you see a picture of many of these outstanding scientists. I won't go through all of them. On the one on the left top is John von Neumann. Von Neumann is just a fancy name. His name was John Neumanni, but he wanted a more German-sounding name, so he changed it when he converted. He changed his name to John von Neumann. He is actually one of the fathers of modern computing. Now, I want to talk about some heroes and then some villains. So one of the most outstanding heroes is Raoul Wallenberg, a Swede, born in 1912, disappeared in 45. You can see he was just in his early 30s when he disappeared. He was Sweden's special envoy to Hungary. You remember, Sweden was neutral during the war. So Wallenberg used this, and he issued passport to Jews, and he bought buildings, and he said, this is now Swedish territory, and he put Jews there, and he saved tens of thousands of lives. I think he should be considered one of the greatest humanitarians of the 20th century. The Nazis had a plan. Before the Soviets will take over, they wanted to bomb the ghetto. And he told them that you do that, and I will personally make sure that you're going to be all tried as a court-martialed for crimes of war. And he scared them from bombing the ghetto. And then the Soviet Union arrives in Budapest, and he's detained by the KGB, and he disappeared, not to ever be seen again. And what happened, his fate is still a mystery to this very day. Hannah Szenes, SZ in Hungarian is S, Szenes, Hannah Szenes. Born 1921, died 1944. You can see she was just 23 years old when she died. She was Hungarian. She was born in Hungary, and before even age 20, she immigrated to Palestine. In 1943, she volunteered for the British Air Force, and she enlisted in the British Women Auxiliary Air Force. And she, together with a few other Palestinians at the time, were Palestinian Jews. She and a few other Palestinian Jews parachuted to Yugoslavia, hoping to help the Jews in Hungary. She was caught by the Hungarian, tortured, tried for treason, and executed. She was a poet. This is her last poem. She wrote it when she knows she's going to die. And I hope I can read it and stay composed because I find it so moving. Blessed is the match consumed in kindling flame. Blessed is the flame that burns in the secret fastness of the heart. Blessed is the heart with strength to stop its beating for honor's sake. Blessed is the match consumed in kindling flames. Incredibly moving. Now, someone who is less than a hero, Rudolph Israel Kasztner. He was a Zionist leader in Hungary. He was one of the leaders of something was called Budapest Aid and Rescue Committee. And he came up with a plan. It was called Bloods for Goods Plan. And he negotiated with Eichmann a deal to take close to 1,700 Jews and rescue them, send them to Switzerland for a ransom. Each one will pay $1,000. This is $1,000 not of today. This is the $1,000 of then. This was a lot of money. And he was successful. The train ultimately arrived in December of 44. The train arrived in Switzerland and all the people on the train survived. But at the same time, Kasztner knew about, but did not publicize the Werber-Westler report about Auschwitz and Birkenau. And that was part of the deal with Eichmann. He could not tell people what's going on because everybody knows if people knew that they are deported to die, there will be a whole, who knows what was going to happen. So he agreed to stay quiet about that to save 700 Jews that went on the train. We will come back to see what happened to him. Now, let's go back to Pinchas Rosenfeld, my father. So he went to Budapest because he knew there were no deportations in Budapest. But remember, he grew up in Romania. He speaks Hungarian because there were many Hungarians in Transylvania. But he has an accent. He does not speak native Hungarian. So very quickly he realized that to be in Budapest and speak Hungarian with a Romanian accent, it does not look good. So he makes the second decision. He has to get to Romania. We'll see in a few minutes why Romania. So he makes his way back to, first of all, to his hometown. He gets caught by the police. They find out he's Jewish. They throw him in jail. He managed to con his way out of jail, and he gets to the border. He crosses the border, and he arrives in Bucharest in July of 1944. Now, why does he want to go to Romania? So again, we need a little bit of Romanian history. Romania became independent in 1878 from the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and it joined the Allies in World War I, and it gained lots of territories. When he joined the Axis a little bit after Hungary. So it lost some territory. It lost, for example, part of Transylvania went back to Hungary. But when the Soviet Union, when Germany started capturing territory of the Soviet Union, Romania got some of these territories back. So for them at the end, it was a good deal. It was a monarchy, King Mihai with a dictator, General Ion Antonescu. By August, Antonescu is deposed. Romania jumps ship again. They joins the Allies. There was a German, a Luftwaffe airport just next to Bucharest. So the German did not have enough forces in Bucharest to recapture Bucharest, so decided to bomb Bucharest. So the bombers would take off from imagine that Houston is being bombed by bomber from IAH. The bomber would take off, bomb the city, go down, rearm, and bomb again. My father was a young man. At some point, he decided he was tired of running to the shelter. He was in a house. A bomb fell down. Suddenly, half the house was gone. Fortunately, he was a house that did not fall down, and he decided it's a good idea to go to the shelter. And by the end of August, the Red Army entered Bucharest, and Bucharest was liberated. So on Bucharest, there was not a very severe fight between the Germany in the town. So Bucharest was destroyed by the bombing, but not by a land battle. Now, Antonescu was a similar, we saw that Horthy distinguished between our Jews and not our Jews. So Antonescu is responsible for mass murder by deportation execution of about 300,000 Jews in the new territories, Bessarabia, Bukovina, Transnistria. These are not our Jews because they're not Romanian citizens. But Jews who are Romanian citizens, he said, these are our Jews. And he refused to give them to the Germans. So the 375,000 Jews inside Romania proper were relatively safe. They survived. And that's why my father decided if he makes it to Bucharest, he will be safe. Antonescu was executed for war crimes by Romania by Soviet, but once Romania joined the Soviet bloc, he was executed in 1946. Now let's go back to my mother who is in Auschwitz. How do you survive Auschwitz? First, you need lots of luck. Remember the story, how old are you? 16, say 18? This is luck. But Virgil said, fortune favors the bold. And Pasteur said, fortune favors the prepared mind. And my mother wrote both. The bloc capo, the head of her bloc, was a Polish prisoner. Before the war, one of her sisters went to visit an aunt in Poland, and she learned Polish songs. The song Date at 9 p.m. was a very popular pre-war Polish songs. It is, you can hear it in the movie The Piano Player. And her sister learned it in Poland, came home and taught her sisters, including my mother, Polish songs. So my mother starts singing Polish songs when she's in line. And she gets favorable treatment from the bloc capo, a Polish prisoner. And she got better food. How do you get better food? There was a big bowl of soup, huge bowl of soup. And if the capo liked you, they dip the ladle very, very low in the bowl, and you get more substance. If they don't like you, they go to the top and you get mostly liquid. And that's how she survived. Viktor Frankl, famous psychologist from Austria, who was a prisoner in Auschwitz and survived and wrote a famous book, Man's Search for Meaning, wrote to me one of the most important sentences about people. Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the loss of human freedom, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. As we have been going through this the last year, for me, it's the worst years of my life. I remember that sentence. We have one freedom to choose our own attitude. So I want to give you an example of my mother choosing her own attitude. My mother was in Auschwitz on Yom Kippur in the fall of 1944. And of course, in Auschwitz, this was a regular work day. But my mother decided to fast. And she fasted on Yom Kippur. She was already undernourished, but she was determined, this is Yom Kippur. I'm not going to eat. And she fasted for 24 hours and survived. That's attitude. There are many death marches. This is a phenomenon, death marches. One of the biggest one was the Auschwitz Death March. By late 44, the Nazis know that the Red Army is coming. So they stopped the gas chamber was destroyed by the Nazis in late 44 because they wanted to destroy evidence. And in January 18, 1945, they take all the non-sick, they left behind the sick and the old, everybody else they took with them, we're going to go back to Germany. This was a march of hundreds of miles in harsh winter. Very, very little food. If you fell behind, you were shot. I mean, we don't know exactly how many people survived this particular death march, but the estimate is that at least 250,000 people died in various death marches. Freedom was not dramatic. One morning they got up and the Germans were gone. They escaped in the middle of the night. They were suddenly free. They were in the middle of nowhere. They had to find their way back to civilization. They have to find food. They had to survive, but they were free. And eventually she made her way up. She went back to her hometown. Short time after that, the New York Times reported on February 3 that Pravda reported on February 2 that the Red Army liberated Auschwitz and saved several thousand tortured and massacred inmates of Germany's greatest murder factory in Auschwitz, that's the Polish name, in southwest Poland. In general, it was better to be rescued by the Soviets than by the Americans. Because the Americans saw how hungry you are, they gave you lots of food. And many people died because they were starved and suddenly they ate too much and they died. And the Soviet Union did not, the Red Army did not give them so much food. And whoever was still in some health did survive. One of my mother's sister was sick and stayed in Auschwitz and did not survive. She was very close to being liberated, but did not survive it. So on January 27, the Red Army finally arrived at Auschwitz. Before arriving at Auschwitz, they took a rest. Just within a range of Auschwitz, they decided to rest from the previous battle and rest for 10 days while people were dying left and right in Auschwitz. They find 9,000 prisoners there, and the majority of them did survive. Adolf Helf, who was the commandant of Auschwitz, was caught, and eventually he was tried and hung by the Polish Supreme National Tribunal. I want to spend a few minutes talking about the aftermath. Germany surrendered on May 7. Eichmann was captured, but managed to escape and live hidden in a small village in Germany. In the 1950s, there was a whole underground of trying to help Nazis, including run by the Catholic Church, and he made his way to Argentina. He lived under assumed name, but apparently it was not very difficult for the Mossad to find him, as opposed to, for example, other Nazis like Mengele was able to hide in Argentina or Brazil, and he was never caught. But Eichmann was caught. But before talking about his capture, Eichmann gave an interview to Life magazine, and the story appeared on November 28, 1960. This is called the Eichmann interviews. These are blood-curdling interviews because he's proud of what he did. All told, he said, we succeeded in posting about 500,000 Jews in Hungary. To sum it all up, I must say I regret nothing. I must say truthfully, if we had killed all 10 million Jews that Himmler statistician listed in 1933, I would say, good, we've destroyed an enemy. He was a true anti-Semite. These interviews appeared after he was already captured. I have managed to get these copies of Life magazine. I have these copies. As I said, these are reading this makes your hair stand. On May 11, 1960, he was kidnapped by Mossad agents and brought to Israel. There was the famous Eichmann trial. His defense was, I was following order. He was found guilty and he was executed on June 1, 1962. Israel does not generally have death penalty. This was the one exception for crimes against humanities. Now, there is still a controversy. You know, there is a famous book by Hannah Arendt, Eichmann in Jerusalem, and she coined the phrase, the banality of evil. But if she had read these interviews, she would not have thought this. She thought that Eichmann was some kind of a petty bureaucrat, but it was an act. His behaving as a petty bureaucrat was an act. And I recommend another book, Eichmann Before Jerusalem. And here is a quote from a review by the author Bettina Stangeth. Disturbing account of Eichmann years in exile revealed the full extent of his cynicism, inhumanity, and moral deception. The phrase, the banality of evil, deserves to be thrown to the dust heap of history. I mentioned Kasztner. Kasztner moved to Israel after the war. He was Zionist leader. He became a spokesman for the Ministry of Trade and Industry. In 1953, a Holocaust survivor, Malkiel Greenwald, wrote a pamphlet accusing Kasztner of collaborating with the Nazis. Because he was a government official, the Israeli government sued Greenwald for libel. This became known as the Kasztner trial. It was really the Greenwald trial, but the defense put Kasztner as the issue was, is Kasztner guilty or not of this claim? And so we still call it today the Kasztner trial. And Benjamin Levy, the judge, ruled Kasztner sold his soul to the devil. Remember, Kasztner made a deal with the Germans, and Halevi said he sold his soul to the devil. He was found guilty. Grunwald was found guilty on one item and fined 1 lira. 1 lira before the shekel was a lira. So who knows? A lira today is maybe a penny. He resigned his position. He became a recluse, and sometime not too long later, he was shot by veterans from a pre-state Jewish militia. But the case was appealed by the state. Remember, it was not Kasztner that sued, but the state sued, and the state appealed to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court overruled the district court, and they argued that publicizing the Verba Welzer report would not help Hungarian Jewry. My father was always outraged by that. He says, I was a 17-year-old boy, and I was able to survive because I did not want to be deported. How many people could have helped themselves if they were determined not to be deported? Pinchas and Ziporah, they go back to their hometown. She meets her brother, Eliezer. Then Pinchas and Ziporah go to displaced person camp. There they decide they have a relationship. They immigrate to Palestine in 47, 48. They get drafted for the IDF, and then they got married in 49. So they are out of the Holocaust. In 49, they get married. They found a kibbutz. This is very idyllic kibbutz, and they said, okay, time to start a family. And in 1950, my little sister was born. These are my parents. They came out of hell, dust themselves off, and they says, okay, time to go back to life, start a family. You know, this is just one of the stories that makes your hair stand. I think especially in these days, we all recognize that civilization and democracy should not be taken for granted. We somehow thought this is the end of history. History does not end. If we want democracy and civilization, we have to keep fighting for it. You saw how individual choices and action matters. It matters what you do. Human resilience is incredible. Here they are a few years after the Holocaust, and they start a family. And I'll finish by quoting Edmund Burke. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. We are all responsible. We are all responsible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Moshe. I was totally captivated by your story. I actually have a question here from somebody who said, wanted to know why you changed your last name.
I did not change my last name. That's a good question. My father changed his last name. So his name was Rosenfeld. Rosenfeld literally means field of roses. Jews had to take a name sometimes in the 18th century. There was suddenly a new thing. Before that, he would have called Pinchas, son of Moshe Yaakov. Moshe Yaakov is my grandfather. I'm named after my grandfather. But 18th century, they have supposed to take names. So they take all kinds of poetic names, and many names to do with roses. If you think about it, it's Rosenfeld and Rosenberg and Rosenkrantz and Rosenstern. They're all field of roses, stars of roses. Vardi means rose-like. Vered is rose in Hebrew. And after the Holocaust, many people with German-sounding name did not want it. They went to a new country. They learned to speak Hebrew. They wanted to have Hebrew names. So he changed his name from Rosen. I was born already Vardi.
There's a question here. Is there an updated version of your book about reasoning available available or planned?
Reasoning about knowledge. No. I mean, some project you do, that book 10 years to write. I'm thinking it is going to be a gargantuan project. Maybe when I retire, who knows?
So You spoke about Rudolph Kasztner. Who was on the Kasztner train?
So that's, we can talk a lot about who the Kasztner train. So remember, it costs $1,000 to get on the train. So first of all, it tells you who is on the train, rich people. So people who could afford to buy their freedom and life got on the train. Or people who were deemed important enough that somebody would put the money for them. People who did not have $1,000. Remember, this is $1,000. I mean, this is, I can go back and try to calculate what it means. This would be like today, who knows what it is today? Maybe $50,000, huge amount of money. And one of the most famous many rabbis, I think there was about 40 rabbis on the train. And one of the most famous on them was the rabbi of Satmar. Now, the Satmar Rebbe is the Satmars is a very strict, very almost fundamentalist, I would say, Hasidic dynasty. They were known as very anti-Zionist, rabid anti-Zionist, and at the time when Jews, some Jews thought of trying to leave Hungary, they were told, do not go to Palestine. Do not go to Palestine. And when people are worried what will happen, there's a war, they've heard stories about Germany, what will happen. And he said, you have to have trust in Hashem. You have to have trust God. And the Hasidim stayed in Hungary because they trusted him and they trusted God. And many, many of them perished. And he was important enough to be put on the Kasztner train and become free. And he ended up coming to the United States. He didn't go to Israel. He came to the United States, and they are in Williamsburg, I think. But this is a very inglorious chapter of Hasidic Judaism.
So another question we have here is many Jews in Budapest were, lined up and they were marched to the Danube River and, were killed. Do you have any comments on that?
I said what happened so the deportation stopped in July of 44. So when the Aero Cross takes over Hungary, they start killing Jews, but they do it now in sort of an industrial way. They have to do it in a pre-industrial way. Death marches, even if you remember the history of the Holocaust, it took a while for the German to perfect their killing machine. At the beginning, they would again bring in Jews, dig your own grave, we'll shoot you, and all kind of things like that. It turns out that when you try to kill millions of people, doing it by shooting people, it's just very hard. So they gradually develop their killing machine, the industrial killing machine of Birkenau and other places. But that evolved as the numbers of the people. So Auschwitz went back to kind of pre-industrial killing. It also, in some sense, meant that people were able to hide and do all kind of things. So that people did survive, more people survived. So if you look, the majority of the people in Budapest survived. But in the countryside, the majority of the people perished.
And they've got those bronze shoes at the edge of the river.
Yeah, there is a famous display, yeah.
So we have time for one more question. It says here, which Jewish Hungarian scientists would you consider as the most important of the 20th century?
There were so many of them, and they are I would say for me, the computer scientist, von Neumann is considered the greatest mathematician of the 20th century, and is the father of computing. Wigner received the Nobel Prize for chemistry. Teller is the father of the hydrogen bomb. Very hard for me to, and I don't like to try to take, everybody has made some great contribution, and it's hard to go and to say who is more important than whom.
Well, thank you.
But the talent that came out of it is just astounding. I think we have yet to see someone writing kind of the history of Hungarian Jewry, and especially the explosion of talent and science and literature and culture in the 20th century. It's an astounding story that ends up so tragically.
Oh, Moshe, thank you again very much. We are grateful for you taking the time to give us this moving presentation. And as I said earlier, it is so important for the second gen to continue to tell their parents' stories for future generations. So I want to be considerate of everyone's time, so I'll close the program out. Thank you everyone for joining us on the webcast this evening. Good night.
Thank you for joining me all.
Thank you.